To sculpt this character head, we're going to start with the basic head shape. We're not going to worry about things like the ears, the eye sockets, nose, the neck, anything like that, just the dark inked section in this example drawing here. If you have a second monitor, it would be good to pull this up on the side. That's what I'm going to do now. And then once we get into Blender, we need to set up our basic settings. I'm going to pull open our tool shelf here. Now we can see our names over here. I've set the background to white for clarity in this presentation. I'm also going to go into the shading settings and turn on the cavity and change that to both. This again is just a little extra helpful visualization, but it doesn't actually change the sculpting. We're going to use the grab brush. We can either click on it here or we can use the hotkey G. I'm going to change the radius to 250, so it's nice and big. And we're going to turn on our symmetry. If we come up here to the little butterfly, I'm going to click the X, and that's going to give us X-axis symmetry. With characters, we pretty much always want to use the X-axis for symmetry because that is our left to right. We can start by pulling in the sides of the character's head. If we pull these towards the center there, remember this is happening in screen space, so the angle of our viewport matters, but with a couple of grabbing brush strokes here, we can start to flatten out the sides of the head a little bit to begin making that shape. Now it looks a little bit more like a flattened sphere, but a few more brush strokes and we should be getting our shape pretty soon. Some of the major changes that we're going to do next are going to be from the side. So if we click on our little X-axis up here, we can actually lock to the side view before we begin to make our jaw shape. So let's go ahead and do that now. We can pull this down like that. Now we'll notice that there's this kind of weird pinching, almost like a thumbed clay effect going on in here. And that's because we right now have more polygons than we really need for the shape we are trying to make, which means our grab brush is leaving behind these kind of pinched areas. And so for these parts, I prefer to set the voxel size up to something fairly high like 0.25, 0.22, something like that, and Control R. There we go. Now our cavity is highlighting how low poly this thing is, and that's okay. We can bring those polygons back when we're ready to move on from this shape. But for now, this is going to reduce little problems in pinching that happens as we try to work with our grab brush. And now we can start to pull this backwards. Looking at our reference, we can pull this up a little, start to form the back of the cranium, pull this up for the jaw a little bit. If we hit F, we can adjust the grab brush size. Try to pull this down maybe a little bit, pull that up, start to form that jaw shape a little bit. Once we're pretty happy with that, we should Control R again, voxel remesh it in that new shape, and that just redistributes those polygons so that they're nice and even. It's never too early to voxel remesh again. Now let's turn back into 3D view, just rotate. There we go. And it's coming together pretty well, but you may often find that it's wider than it really ought to be because we've only been looking at it from one angle. Now, if we hold the Alt key while we rotate, we can actually lock to a view, which is the same as pushing one of these buttons. So rotating and then Alt. There we go. And from this view, we can see that the back is actually really wide where the front is really narrow. So I'm actually going to come back here and fix some of that. Just like that. Pull that jaw line together a little bit. Smaller brush size, we can bring in maybe the eye section a little. Yeah, and that's starting to look pretty good. Remember, the grab brush works in screen space, so if we want to pull our polygons in a particular direction, we need to orient our view in a way that accommodates that direction. And there we go, a pretty good starting point for our head, all just using the grab brush. Now that we have the basic shape of the head, we're ready to add a little bit higher frequency detail. So for that, we're going to need a little more resolution. Shift R to bring up the size of the voxel remesher. Let's set that voxel size to about 0.1. Control R to run the voxel remesher. And from this point, we're going to use some masks to add in the ears and the neck. To create a mask, we can use the mask brush, which is right here on the toolbar. And to be able to see the mask, we need to check our viewport overlays, make sure they're on, and that we have the mask overlay enabled underneath the sculpting section. To make a mask for the ear, let's turn to the side, set our brush radius to 50 pixels. Now we can paint an ear shape on the side of the head. This works by coloring the vertices that belong to these polygons, and because we don't have very many polygons, we can't be terribly precise, so don't worry about it looking exactly like an ear, just vaguely the correct shape right there. The dark parts of the mask are going to prevent our other brushes from affecting that area. This is actually backwards from what we want, so let's invert the mask by going up to Mask, Invert Mask. We could also press Ctrl-I, and now we have a clear area where we can add our ears. Let's use the draw brush. Draw a vaguely ear-shaped piece in there. And the nice thing with the mask is that we can be as sloppy as we want while working in that area because we cannot affect any other parts of this character. Just these areas where we want the ears. When you're happy with that shape, we can clear the mask by going to Mask, Clear Mask. We could also press Alt-M. Now that we have the new shape for the ear, we can press Ctrl-R to run our voxel remesher again. Let's use another mask to make the neck. Grab the mask brush, draw an area for the neck. That looks pretty good. We can invert the mask. And then this time, we're going to use the grab brush with a large radius, let's say 250. Previously, when we've used the grab brush, it's been working in screen space, which means when we pull upwards, it moves the polygons upwards relative to our current view. When we pull to the side, it moves them to the side. In this case, we want to pull the polygons outwards along the direction that they are each individually facing. And to do that, we can use the alternate function of the grab brush by holding Control. Then we can click and drag. That looks like a pretty good start to a neck. Let's go to a side view. Keep using the grab brush. As long as we've got our mask in here, that looks pretty good. Now we can clear the mask by pressing Alt-M. Ctrl-R to run our voxel remesher, and we've got our basic shapes. Now obviously this neck and this ear are not in quite the right positions, but now we can come in with our grab brush and make the necessary adjustments. Once we have these initial shapes, the ears, the jaw, the neck, we can use the grab brush to keep moving them around until we're happy with the proportions. Don't forget to run the voxel remesher again, and don't forget to look at it from 3D angles. Once you're happy with the overall shape, hit Ctrl-R one more time to run the voxel remesher again, and we can move on. Picking up where we left off, we can add new details to the head. Let's decrease our voxel size with Shift-R. Let's set that to about 0.05, and then Ctrl-R to run the voxel remesher. Now we've got plenty of new polygons to work with. To make the bridge of the nose, let's try out the clay strips brush, which we can pick right here from the tool shelf. Set our radius to about 50, and our strength to 1. From here, we can build up the bridge of the nose. Using our drawing tablet, go back and forth over the bridge, and if you need to, you can lift up with your pen and start a new brush stroke to continue adding to that form. Don't forget to run the voxel remesher in between brush strokes as we build up the form of the nose. Now we can build up the brow. Let's continue up from the nose and over the eye sockets. That'll make a nice brow and start to define the eye socket itself. To continue the eye socket, we're actually going to use the subtraction mode of the clay strips brush. So hold down Control, and then we can start to carve out that eye socket. Let's see how it looks from the other angles. We could try building up a little bit more, carving out a little bit more there, maybe define the cheek a little bit in that area. Carve out a little bit more for the eye socket. And it's really starting to come together. We could start to add the outer part of the nostrils here, But resist the temptation of trying to carve out the nostril holes themselves, because we don't have enough resolution for that yet, and it's too early to decrease our voxel size because we're still missing the other facial features. Smoothing is a really important part of the sculpting workflow. Our brow has ended up really jagged looking because of the clay strips brush. To reduce this jagged effect, we can grab the smooth brush and use it to smooth out these areas. It works best with very light pressure. We really ought to be using a graphics tablet when we're sculpting, but if you don't have one, you can reduce the strength of the smooth brush in the tool settings. Be careful not to press too hard or to use too high of a strength, otherwise we'll end up erasing the details of our model. Speaking of details, it's time to increase our resolution by reducing the voxel size. Shift R and set that to about 0.025. Then press Ctrl R to run the voxel remesher again. At this point, the surface of the model is looking pretty rough. This is especially apparent because we've turned on the cavity display in our viewport shading. We can see highlighting around the brow, the nose, the cheek, these areas in the neck and the forehead, which are all happening because of the rough surface. And that rough surface is a result of our voxel remeshing workflow. To combat this, let's smooth the whole surface of the model. We could do this with the smooth brush, but let's do it to the whole model all at the same time. For that, we can use the mesh filter. Scroll down on our list of tools and find the mesh filter. Up in the tool settings, change the filter type to smooth. The mesh filter does not work the same way as a brush. We do not have to draw on a specific part of the model. Instead, tap down with your pen and begin dragging to the right. The further to the right you drag, the more intense the filter will be. If you drag too far to the right and over-smooth the model, don't worry, as long as you have not lifted your pen yet, you can drag back to the left to reduce the smoothing effect. Find somewhere that's in between to reduce those rough areas without losing all the details of your model. Let's enhance some of the facial features of our character with the Inflate brush. We can grab the Inflate brush from the toolbar right here. A radius of 50 pixels will be fine, but we should turn the strength all the way up to 1. The nose on this character is looking a little bit flat, so let's inflate it. If we draw in a small circular pattern, we can keep inflating the same spot until it's the size that we like. Don't forget to look at your character from multiple angles. From this angle, we can see that the bridge of the nose ended up looking pretty thick. We can switch the direction of our Inflate brush to deflate the bridge of the nose. Hold down Ctrl and click around the edge of the nose. That's looking a little bit more reasonable. The nostrils on this character have also ended up looking really small. Let's inflate them too. We can either reduce the brush radius or zoom in to get a better look. And now let's inflate the nostrils. That's looking pretty good. As long as we're using the Inflate brush, the cheeks will look really nice if we give them a little bit more volume. Let's increase the brush radius a little bit, and then we can inflate the cheek in a triangular pattern. That's looking pretty good, but just a little bit lumpy, so if we hold Shift, we can use our smooth brush to clean up that area. Eyes are typically done as separate objects from our main sculpture, so let's switch into Object mode and append a pair of eyes into this blend file. We can go File, Append, then use the file browser to navigate to where we've saved the Chapter 3 Simple Eyes blend file. Double-click on the blend file to open it up and browse its contents. We're going to find the Collection folder and then the Eyes collection. Double-clicking on the Eyes collection will import it into this blend file. We can see our eye is actually highlighted right here, but obviously that's hard to see. So let's turn on X-ray so we can see that a little bit better. Now we've got our eyes, but they're not in the right spot and they're not the right size. We can fix that with our transformation tools over here on the left. Activate the Move tool, and this will give us colored arrows that we can use to move the eyes. This is going to be easiest if we lock our view to a front view by clicking on the -Y indicator. Once we're here, we can pull up on the blue arrow, outwards on the red arrow, until we've got the eyes where we like them. Now remember, we are working in 3D, so now let's lock to the side view by clicking on the X, and we can pull that forward until the eyes are in the right spot. The eyes are still the wrong size though, so let's use the Scale tool. We want to maintain proportions while we scale the eyes, so instead of using the colored indicators, we can hover inside of the large white circle and click and drag. Once we've got the eyes where we like them, we can turn the X-ray back off, then tap to select our character head, and change back into Sculpt mode. Because the eyes are separate objects, they will not be affected by the brush strokes that we make on the head. So now we can sculpt the eyelids. Choose the Crease brush from the toolbar. For eyelids, we really want to get in close so we can see what we're doing. Let's zoom in on the eye. Let's increase our strength, decrease our radius, and start to sculpt in the corners of the eye. Now let's use the opposite direction of the crease brush to begin building up the eyelids. Hold down Control, and start to draw in where the eyelid should go. Simple enough. Now let's do the bottom one. Hold down Control, and draw in where the lower eyelid should go. That's a good start, but the shape of our eyes is looking a little strange at this point, especially when we start to look at it from multiple angles. We've got our basic structure, so now it's just a matter of using our brushes to continue tweaking the model until we're happy with the shape. The grab brush in particular is going to be helpful for adjusting the eyelids so that they align with the eyeballs correctly. I'll speed up the rest of this section into a time lapse, sculpting these eyes using the grab brush and other brushes that we've learned how to use in this chapter. For the best results, you should pull up reference images on the side so that you can constantly check your work against what actual eyes look like. Try not to get discouraged if the eyes aren't turning out right away. As human beings, we're hypersensitive of the way eyes are supposed to look. If you need to, you can always go back into object mode and adjust the size and position of the eyeballs. You can see that I'm mostly relying on the grab brush in my workflow, although it's worth pointing out that I use the crease brush again to add definition above and below the eyelids. Keep in mind that we're not finished. This character doesn't even have a mouth yet. Once all the facial features are included in the character, we can go back over everything and refine all of our work. Even with subtle tweaks, the eyes can come out looking like they have completely different emotions. They can go from happy to sad to angry with a single brushstroke. Once you're happy with the eyes, press Ctrl R to run the voxel remesher. We can add some definition back into the ears by using the crease brush. Select the crease brush, zoom in on the ear, hold Ctrl to invert the direction of the brush, and now we can draw the helix of the ear. Run the voxel remesher, orbit the view around so we can see the back of the ear. Now we can start to separate the back of the ear from the side of the head. Now without holding Control, let's use a high pressure to carve through the back of the ear. Because we're carving away a section here, we're going to need to run the voxel remesher several times. Ctrl R to run the voxel remesher, then we can carve with the crease brush again. Do this as many times as you need to. Now we can use the smooth brush to clean up this side of the head. Hold down Shift, and go over the problematic areas with the smooth brush. Have a look at the ear from multiple angles. If we need to, we can keep using our crease brush to touch up the areas. And keep repeating that workflow until we're happy with the shape of the ear. Don't forget to look at the ears from the front. If we need to adjust them, we can use the grab brush. Let's turn our attention to the side view again, and as long as we're using the crease brush, let's carve a hole in the ear. Ctrl R again to run the voxel remesher. Toggling between the crease brush's regular and inverted directions, we can add all sorts of details that we need for the ears. These details are optional at this stage because they mostly consist of surface details. The important part here was to separate the ear from the side of the head. When you're finished adding details, run the voxel remesher again. Before we can make the mouth on this character, we're going to need an even higher resolution. Start by setting the voxel size down to about 0.0175, and run the voxel remesher. If your character ends up looking rough, you can use the mesh filter, Smooth, to smooth out some of the roughness from the voxel remeshing. Now we're ready to draw the guidelines for the mouth. First, let's go to a front view, then zoom in where we're going to put the mouth. Scroll up until you find the Draw Sharp brush, set the radius to 20 pixels, and the strength all the way to 1. Our first guideline will be a deep groove to form the space between the lips. Our next lines are all going to be ridges, so hold down Control to invert the brush, then draw to form the upper lip. Draw again to form the lower lip. Then do one short vertical line to form the ridges of the philtrum which connect into the Cupid's bow. Below our lower lip, let's let go of Control and draw one small groove to begin defining where the chin is going to be. Next, let's make the lines that define the region where the cheeks meet the mouth. Start above one of the nostrils, Draw outwards, try to outline the cheek shape that we made before, and then draw down. At first our character looks a lot worse, but once we use some of our other brushes and smooth out these details, it's going to look a lot better. From here, we're going to use many of the brushes that we've learned how to use already in this chapter. One of the biggest problems right now is that the mouth has no dimension. It's perfectly flat up against the face. Lips are supposed to be raised up away from the mouth. We can do that with the grab brush. Increase the radius. Hold down Control to engage the secondary function of the grab brush, and begin to pull out the lips. They're looking better already. If we look from the side, we should start to see a silhouette following the nose over the lips and then down to the chin. We can smooth out the divot for the chin now. Hold down Shift and use the smooth brush. We can also smooth out some of these other areas. Be careful not to completely erase our guidelines. Next, let's exaggerate some of these forms with the Inflate brush. Both of the lips could use a little inflation, as well as the cheeks above these lines that we've created. Now let's use some light pressure and the smooth brush to ease off on some of those harsh lines. Some of these lines are looking pretty angular and would benefit from being nudged around with the grab brush. Let's do that now. Select the grab brush, go to a view that we can see a little bit better, use a large radius so we don't get pinching, and let's just start to pull those cheeks down a little bit. We could also adjust the lips. We can intensify the philtrum by pulling down and pulling the edges together. And that's a pretty good start. There's a lot more we could do with this, but we'll save that for the detail pass. In this late stage in the sculpture, we're ready to sharpen up some of the details. Before we do that though, let's change the shading on the character so that it's using smooth shading instead of flat shading. If we zoom into the character, we can see that the polygons are very apparent. This is partly due to the cavity feature that we turned on earlier, but a big part of it is the fact that we're using flat shading. To change this, we need to temporarily switch into object mode, then use the object menu, and choose Shade Smooth. Now the shading between all the polygons will look a lot smoother. Let's switch back into sculpt mode. One issue with this is that it's even further highlighted how not sharp our eyelids are looking right now. Let's fix that with the pinch brush. Select the pinch brush, increase the strength to 1, zoom in further so we can see the eye up close, set the radius so it's not too much thicker than the eyelid itself. Now start tracing over the eyelid to begin pinching the polygons together. This will take several passes to get right, so don't be afraid to use many small brush strokes. And that's made a pretty big difference already. Now let's do the upper eyelid. Zooming out to see the character as a whole, we can see that this made a pretty big difference. We can also see other areas that would benefit from pinching. Let's zoom in on the lips. And we can use the pinch brush to trace over the outlines of the lips. It's pretty amazing how much of an impact a simple change like that can make on our character. However, we saved this for last on purpose. The pinch brush pulls polygons together so tightly that if we run the voxel remesher again, we'll end up erasing all of the details. In this bonus section of the video, we're going to use the brushes that we've learned throughout the chapter to refine the shape of his head. The sculpture finally had enough polygons to be able to add the nostrils, so I used a combination of the crease brush and the grab brush. I wasn't satisfied with the overall shape of the head, it was protruding too far, so I used a combination of the snake hook brush and the grab brush, both with a very large radius, to change the shape of the face. Here I'm using a combination of the crease brush and the pinch brush to add a little more definition to the upper eyelids. I gave a little bit of the same treatment to the area under the cheek, as well as the area under the nostril. The sculpture finally has enough resolution to be able to support the details of the ear, so I grabbed the clay strips brush and began tracing over some of the details. Ears are really tough, so be sure to grab some photo reference so you know what details to sculpt. Even the back of the ear has some details that we don't want to miss out on. I'm using the crease brush and the draw brush to try to improve the connection of the back of the ear to the side of the head. To refine the jaw, I use the pinch brush with a large radius to help create a sharp jawline. Here I'm refining the cheeks with the Inflate brush, building them up a little bit in a triangular pattern, as well as carving away a little bit below the cheeks. The grab brush continues to be useful at this stage. Here I'm just nudging little bits closer and closer together, as well as refining how the eyelids cling to the surface of the eyeball. Using photo reference, we can tell that the skin of the cheek crosses over the bridge of the nose slightly, so I'm going to use the draw brush, crease brush, and pinch brush to create that detail. Here I'm refining the shape of the mouth a bit, giving it a little bit more dimension. I'm carving inward where the lips meet with the crease brush, and then using the pinch brush to pull it together. The crease brush can also be used at the corners of the mouth to make a more realistic transition into the face. It's helpful to refine the details across the head at an even pace. We can keep coming back to these areas over and over again and refining them a little bit more. At this point, I'm much happier with the general shape of the head, but the back of the neck and the shoulders need a little bit of definition, so I used a combination of the snake hook brush and the draw brush to build out the trapezius and the clavicle. One of the best ways to make a neck feel more realistic is to sculpt in the sternocleidomastoid, which is this muscle that connects from behind the ear down into the front of the neck and to the clavicle. At this point, I'm looking around the sculpture trying to find any areas that can be improved. Remember that it is a piece of three-dimensional art, and you need to look at it from multiple angles to make sure that it actually is coming out okay. With practice, you'll become more familiar with the sculpting brushes, and you'll build up an intuition as to which brushes should be used to improve any given area of the sculpture. Thank you for watching.